Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the second annual National Summit on Education Reform. The purpose of Excellence in Action is to ignite a passion in people to transform our education systems where we work, and many of you serve in the public sector, to turn it into a 21st century enterprise where children gain the power of knowledge. Our goal is to arm you with ideas. We've got a lot of everybody's really smart, but we have a lot of really great policy experts that have come from far-off places like beautiful Australia, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and all across our own country. And so we're so delighted that you all are here. We have more than 100 lawmakers with us and senior policy advisors, both Republicans and Democrats, from 22 states around the nation. And the fact that so many of those folks have come to be able to steal ideas from people that are either implementing them in other parts of the country or have ideas that they want to have stolen to be able to implement them is a tribute to the importance of this issue. We live in perilous times. People are really focused on the economy, but our economy will rebound, and when it does, in my opinion, this issue of education will be the number one issue, once again, as it normally is, all across the country. So we're delighted to have you here. I want to thank the sponsors whose generosity makes it possible for us to have this event. Teresa Chastain from WIN, Bill Laser from IQity, who's not here. He has the flu, and everybody is happy that he's not here, I guess. The entire team from the Walton Family Foundation and many, many others, we thank you so much for your support. I also want to thank the speakers and panelists that will be with us starting here at lunch and then moving on to for the next day and a half, particularly Deputy Prime Minister Julie Gillard from Australia. She will share her experiences in implementing education reform in Australia. Peje Emilsson, who is an education entrepreneur from Stockholm, Sweden, will talk about his incredibly innovative schools that I'm at least pretty excited about. And James Tooley will share his groundbreaking research on schools in the poorest communities on earth. And my good friend Joel Klein is here from New York, and Chancellor Michelle Rhee will be here tomorrow morning from Washington, and they'll share their lessons of what it's like to be superintendent of a complex, diverse school district and the challenges of bringing about reform. They both have done spectacular jobs. We have education commissioners and lawmakers from Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Louisiana, and Massachusetts who will tell us what their plans are and what they're doing to advance reforms in their states. But before we start this program, I would like to introduce my longtime friend, T. Willard Fair, who is the chairman of the Board of Education in Florida. Tal and I go way back. I knew Tal when he had hair. He and I founded one of the first charter schools. I worked with him to found one of the first charter schools, the Liberty City Charter School in Miami, and we've developed a bond and a friendship. And with that, I will ask Tal to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and to say a prayer.
Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We come here for the next 2 days to celebrate our commitment to educate the children from around the world. Webster says that when you do an invocation, it is a petition for help and support from a high authority. I will invocate selfishly today. I will call on my God and your God to help my friend Governor Bush to continue to do those things that make sense for the children of the world. I will thank my God for your presence, for it translates into support for his efforts. There is no greater purpose than the purpose that gathers us here today. God's speed is with you. God's blessings upon you. May the food that you eat nourish your body, stimulate your brain cells for a high, unheard of participation on behalf of the children of the world. Amen.
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 Enjoy your meal. Well done.
We have one of the highest high school dropout rates of any industrialized nation.
We've been in an economic crisis for a year or so, but we've been in an education crisis for decades.
And half of the students who begin college never finish. This is a prescription for economic decline.
By 2015, it is estimated that China will have twice as many college graduates as the United States. In the U.S., the college completion rate has remained flat, while in many developed countries, it's increased significantly.
American high school kids are beaten on the international tests, not just by kids from Belgium, but by kids from most countries, even poorer ones like Poland, the Czech Republic, South Korea.
Everyone here knows our children are competing not down the block or in the district, in the state. Our children are competing with children in India and China for jobs. And we have to dramatically raise the bar.
We know the countries that outteach us today will outcompete us tomorrow.
I think we're in an education arms race with the rest of the world because knowledge will drive job creation. High-wage jobs are only going to be created by people that can acquire knowledge. And our education system is not up to the standards that it needs to be.
America has entered an educational arms race with the rest of the world. Winning will require us to rethink and to retool our education system for the 21st century. We need to expect more from our students and from our educators. We must objectively measure knowledge and openly report results. We will need to hold schools and ourselves more accountable for the quality of education in our classrooms. We must have the political courage to take that tough and sometimes rocky road toward excellence. We must embrace the incredible opportunity that comes with transformational change. If we are successful in meeting these challenges, the leading indicators of quality will be student achievement and annual academic growth. Choices for parents and students will be endless. Education spending will show a return on investment, and every child will experience an education tailored especially for them through the power of technology. The time is now. The nations that achieve an education system with these characteristics will own the future, and the nation that owns the future will lead the world. For America to lead, we must learn, and we must act today. Welcome to Excellence in Action, our second National Summit on Education Reform.
Thank you all. Once again, thank you all very much for coming. I have a challenge for you. You're going to be with our panel discussions and speeches and general sessions. You're going to have a chance to hear some really bright people talk about some very interesting ideas. And for the policymakers here, I would encourage you to take at least one of those ideas that you hear that you're excited about, take it home and implement it. If everybody did that in this room, we would begin to see a transformed education system in our country. Because what happens in America, in a dynamic place like America, is that we get a little competitive. When I see Joel Klein implement a really interesting idea, even as a former governor, it gets my juices flowing. And I'm thinking, why doesn't Florida do it? And vice versa. I think that's in a federalist system, that's the way it should be, and that's the way it can be, and you all can play a role in that. So we welcome you, and we hope that you enjoy your time. I'm very encouraged about the prospect of education reform in the United States because there's a growing consensus outside this room that we need to do something different. Think about it. Newt Gingrich and Al Sharpton are on tour to build support for education reform. Who would have predicted that duo being together to talk about anything? To me, that's pretty exciting. In fact, I got an email from Al Sharpton. Who would have thought that that was possible? I got an email saying, when can you join the tour? And so I think there is a changing dynamic about what's happening. I also applaud President Obama and Secretary of Education Arne Duncan's commitment to education reform. To me, it's the place that you could pick where President Obama has showed the most dynamic nature of his policies, and I'm very excited about it. As a committed Republican, a committed conservative, I'm tired of the partisan bickering. It seems like in Washington, even if you agree, you have to find a way to disagree. I believe it's time for us to put that aside, and when we find these moments where there is agreement, we need to build on it. We need to embrace it and build on it so that we can have improvement. One of the places where that could happen is in the $5 billion grants for the Race to the Top money, where eventually this money will be invested in building world-class data systems where we can improve assessments, where we can recruit great teachers and principals, where we can turn around low-performing schools. All of these are important, but of all those things that are part of the prescription of the Race to the Top money, the first step, in my opinion, is building a data system that collects and stores data in a way that will allow us to measure the improvement of every child. In their own unique way, every child can learn, and it's up to us to make sure that we measure it properly so that we intervene early enough in a different way to assure that that progress continues. Frankly, if Walmart can track a box of cereal from the manufacturer to the checkout line and also be able to determine the demography of who's buying that box of cereal, it seems to me that schools ought to be able to track the academic growth of a student from the time they go to the classroom until they graduate. Every year of data that is collected and analyzed helps us make more informed decisions about what's working and what's not. My hope is that we embrace this incredible opportunity where there is an emergence of consensus, that we join forces to advance reform. Why do we care about the quality of education? In my opinion, we care about this because we care about the future of our country. America is truly in an educational arms race, and we need to wage an aggressive campaign of reform if we have any hope of winning it. But the good news is, unlike in the traditional arms races of the past, in this race, the world wins if America wins. The world wins if Australia wins. The world wins if Korea wins. We all win if we can develop reform-oriented policies in our own countries to assure that more and more children gain the power of knowledge, and then use that tool to innovate, to dream, to create more inspirational innovations that create more prosperity than any government program ever created. That's why education is important. It's the one common feature that we have as citizens in our own country and on this planet that can truly make a difference for the next generation. We live in a world that is completely interconnected, more interdependent, and significantly more technologically advanced than the one we grew up in. The financial crisis of last year has only accelerated that. It has not retarded that very important fact. Yet our school systems in our country, at least, remain, by and large, the same as when we were students, or at least when I was a student at the age of 56, a long time ago. The organizational model is basically the same. Imagine if we started from scratch. Do you think our education system today would look like it looked like in 1950? No one would suggest that that would be the optimum way of doing things. In this era of technological innovation, would the school year be based on the agricultural calendar so that kids could get into the fields as quickly as possible to bring the crops in? I don't think so. In this knowledge-based economy, would success be measured by how long students sit at their desk rather than what they learn? I hope not. In an age of customization, would we settle for a one-size-fits-all model that moves kids from grade to grade based on their age rather than their skill level? Hell no, we wouldn't. Last year I said our education system was an 8-track tape in an iPod world. That remains true today. But I want to use a different comparison this year to start off our conference. I want to urge us to think about schools being more like milk. You've heard me, more like milk. Go down the aisle of any major supermarket in any of the communities in which we live these days, and you'll find an incredible selection of milk. Of course, you'll find whole milk, low-fat milk, or skim milk. You can get organic milk, milk with vitamin D, or milk enzymes to improve the way that your brain functions. You can get flavored milk, chocolate, strawberry, or vanilla. You get milk that doesn't taste like milk. Most of the time, there's a whole other refrigerator case dedicated to milk alternatives, not just in Whole Foods, but the supermarkets that a lot of us go to, like soy milk, almond milk, rice milk. They even make milk for people who can't drink milk. Who would have ever thought you could improve upon milk? Well, the fact is, freedom, innovation, and competition found a way. It happens in every aspect of our life, and guess what? It'll happen in education as well. So it seems to me the goal ought to be that we move to a system that is custom designed to maximize every child's God-given ability to learn. That we allow freedom and innovation and competition to reshape our education system around the goal of ensuring the student's success. Under that kind of system, rigorous academic standards would be demanded, not debated. Standards would be fewer, deeper, and more relevant to the world that the students will be entering into when they leave school. We would be required to make sure that every student took more math and science because that's what the emerging job market demands. We would require a second language, or maybe a third language, because global demographics are changing, and so should we. We would make a high school diploma mean that the student is actually ready for the rigors of college as well as the challenge of the workplace. Not one or the other, but both. And we wouldn't think twice about testing students to make sure that they are measuring up to these higher expectations. However, in this customized, individualized system, students wouldn't necessarily take the same test on the same day. Testing would occur when a student has mastered the required skills. In fact, in my opinion, standardized tests, not the calendar year, would become the gateway to the next level of learning. Imagine a continuous learning environment. Doing this would eliminate the need for social promotion, one of the most insidious, quiet policies that exists in education all across our country. Students who couldn't read would not be shuffled to the next grade, only to fall further behind because they lacked the basic skill of all learning. Students would be promoted when they were ready, not before. It would also mean that more students could take more advanced courses and dually enroll in college, for example, and even graduate before they graduate from high school. Why the heck in the United States of America do we hold back kids because they're 16 years old and that's just the way it is when they can take college-level work already? It seems to me that our system needs to be transformed. So for all the doubters thinking maybe Jeb's kind of lost his mind a little bit, he's dreaming a little too much, got a little too much idle time to think that this is possible, that the system we have, that we can move to this customized learning environment. And trust me, I haven't lost my mind. I may be liberated a little bit by not being in public life, so it allows me to dream a little bit differently perhaps, but I'm not crazy. How could we do this for 50 million students in the United States? Well, the first step is to harness technology to tailor lessons to each child's learning style and ability. Technology needs to be at the core of what we do rather than just another tool in the toolbox for learning. This concept was truly only a dream a generation ago, but now it can be accomplished. In fact, it's being accomplished all across our country today. When you think about the possibilities, today's online courses are really just the beginning. We have the ability to create the iTunes of the education world where teachers and students can access rich and rigorous content from different sources to create a learning experience that meets the individual needs of each child. Aligning the content to the standards ensures that students are learning what is important. But students would learn at their own pace, spending more or less time on particular areas based on their ability. Can you imagine how liberating that would be for a student in a classroom all across our country, that they would be pushed where it was appropriate to push them, and there would be remediation when they've lost their way? Technology wouldn't replace the teacher, but it would redefine, perhaps, The role of teaching. Lectures might be given online to thousands of students, while classroom teachers might become more like coaches and tutors available to provide one-on-one support. Mass customization will actually create the chance for more one-on-one learning without holding back the kids that are mastering the material. To make the system truly student-centric, we might have to change how we fund education. We might fund achievement, for example, rather than seat time. We would pay per credit hour upon completion instead of a FTE formula that is generated by the state that takes a student amount per year. Instead, we might break it up by credit to allow for other options to be available for parents and students to be able to get additional learning, part of which would be online. We would pay, that would create an incentive for the system to ensure that each individual student would learn. Finally, we would give parents a choice and a voice in where their kids go to school, arming them with quality information and requiring their engagement. You can call it a scholarship. We tried that in Florida. You can call it a grant. Other places have called it that. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it a voucher if you like. But it doesn't matter what it's called. The fact is that we should empower parents to be fully engaged in their children's education, and we should put aside the question of public and private and look at this totally differently about what's best for the student. Students should not be doomed to a life of poverty because their parents didn't have the financial freedom to opt out of a failing school. Knowing what we know, that a quality education is the single most proven path to prosperity, how can we deny a child that lifeline to that better living and a more secure financial future? That's what this is about, and I'm convinced that a growing number of Americans on the left and the right believe that this is a high moral imperative. In fact, the great social, moral, and economic challenge of our time is providing a high-quality education to every child in our nation, and our success in that effort will define us as a nation. It will define our destiny. An educated and highly skilled workforce will attract investment that fuels job creation and wealth. A quality education will sustain our quality of life and the standard of living that is still the envy of most of the world. In closing, let me emphasize that winning this international education arms race will be a hollow victory if we do not close the achievement gap in our own country. We can no longer tolerate the deepening divide between races and family income that is caused by our failure to fix public education. Moving to a student-centered system will allow us to do both, close the achievement gap and win the arms race. We welcome you to the Excellence in Action Conference, and we hope that you will take these ideas and turn them into reality for the benefit of the next generation of Americans. Thanks. So, with that, I think, Tom, where are you?
You'll be surprised to hear I'm not Tom. I'm Ellen Wynn. I'm the director of the Education Equality Project. And we're so excited to be here with everyone today for what's going to be clearly a couple of really exciting days of conversation and work towards closing the achievement gap, which is exactly what the Education Equality Project was founded to do. The project is really the brainchild and the passion of Joel Klein, who you're going to hear from in a couple of minutes, who brought together leaders from across the country and across the aisle to put all of our attention and all of our focus on closing the achievement gap. Governor Bush was one of our first signatories, as well as Michael Lomax, who's the founder and leader of the United Negro College Fund, Janet Murguia, your Mayor Fenty, Bloomberg, Johnson, most of the big city mayors, and a number of academics and business leaders who've all come together. They disagree about most things, but they agree that the achievement gap is what we need to be focused upon. We live in a day and age 55 years after Brown versus Board of Education. And still, the case is that if you're a Black or Latino student, you've got about a 50-50 chance of graduating from high school. If you're a white or an Asian student, you've got about a 3/4 chance of graduating. This is unacceptable. It's just simply unacceptable. And this is what the Education Equality Project is working to do. And there's information in your packets, and please, I will talk your head off about it, so come and find me. It's my real honor to introduce Tom Vander Ark, who is a signatory, friend, advisor of the Education Equality Project. He's had a really strong career in both education and in the private sector. He currently runs two companies, Revolution Learning, which is an investment fund that invests in schools and new learning techniques, and also Vander Ark Ratcliffe Partners, which is a public advocacy and communications firm that works specifically on education reform. Before that, you all probably know he got to oversee $3.5 billion at the Gates Foundation, which was all focused on ed reform. And he's going to lead the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. $3.5 billion sounds small in the grand scheme of the stimulus plan, doesn't it? It's like my friends at the department now have a budget that we couldn't have even dreamed of at the Gates Foundation. It's really a pleasure to be here at the second one of these, and I'd like to introduce our panelists to come back up. It's a pleasure to be here because you have with you today the best education governor of the last decade, Governor Bush. And he's joined by the best urban school leader in the country, Joel Klein. I want to tell you a quick story about how Joel and I met. I joined what was the Gates Library Foundation back in 1999, and one of our first grants was to New York City. Rudy Crew was the superintendent. He had been superintendent next door to me in Washington State. And I was quite pleased by the progress that they were making on their grant. And I was in the middle of 2002 getting ready to walk into a meeting with Bill and Melinda. And I was going to update them on the fact that I wanted to make another large grant to New York City. And I pulled out my BlackBerry, and it said, Joel Klein appointed chancellor. And I said, holy expletive. You may recall what he was doing before that. He had a different relationship with my boss while he was at the Justice Department. So I'm getting ready to sit down with Bill and Melinda, and this guy is the new chancellor, and I'm about ready to pitch New York City. Fortunately, Bill and Melinda were extraordinarily gracious and all about making a difference for kids. And we finished the meeting. They said, go visit with him, see what he's about. And I was so impressed with my first meeting with the chancellor that a couple weeks later, we were standing on stage with Bill and making a $50 million grant announcement. It has been such a pleasure to watch Joel in action in the last 7 years. He is not only an extremely competent manager and leader, he's really turned into the country's leading advocate for kids and for closing the achievement gap and for founding the Education Equality Project. I'm grateful, and so are the other signatories. So we really appreciate your leadership in New York and now your leadership on a national stage, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you to the podium with the governor. Let's give him a hand if you would.
Thank you.
So I really appreciated your remarks, Governor. They were right on the mark, and I'll be blogging about those tonight. That was a fantastic summary of where we are and where we're headed. Joel, I've had the chance to spend time in New York with some of your folks, and you're probably doing as much as probably more than any other urban district in the United States to try to fulfill the vision that the governor laid out. Could you give us a summary of that?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for your kind remarks. Governor, thank you for not only a great speech, but for the historic work you did in Florida. And Tom's telling you about that $50 million that Bill gave us. It was really quite an emotional day. We hadn't seen each other in a long time, and One of the reasons I became a chancellor is because I had the bad judgment to sue Microsoft when I was at the Justice Department, a rather career-ending move. Got off the stage. It happened to be at the high school where my father had dropped out of many years ago. It was very emotional. And I was feeling quite good. And I walked down and the principal tugged at my jacket and said, "You know what, Chancellor?" He said, $50 million is a great day's work. Think of what Gates would have given you if you hadn't sued him. So anybody who doesn't think we don't have the best workforce in the world in New York City, let me tell you, that sums it up. So, but that's the pivot. I do think the things that Jeb is talking about, I really think are visionary, and I think it is our vision. You know, the old joke used to be, although it's not funny for our kids, the old joke used to be, in any business but ours, if you went to sleep 50 years ago and woke up, you wouldn't recognize it. In ours, it wouldn't have changed one whit. And that has to change. You would think so many other businesses, so many other sectors of the American economy and social sectors that had done well had the brilliance to transform. And yet education, which is done poorly, resists transformation. And at its core, there are two things, and Tom wants to talk about the second, but I also want to talk about the first. Our whole human capital, ours is a people business. And as long as you have lack of accountability, all the wrong incentives, all the wrong structure in your human capital piece, you're not going to solve this problem. And that is first and foremost the massive inequities in the quality of teaching of kids who grow up in high poverty neighborhoods. The quality of teaching should not vary inversely with the kid's zip code or family income. And yet that's exactly what goes on. Now, the second thing is exactly this whole sense of innovation and transformation. And Jeb talked about it, and we actually piloted it this summer, and you'll hear from Pay Emerson, who's doing a lot of this in Sweden. But we piloted a school in which the student was fundamentally the unit that mattered. We didn't think about classrooms, class size, number of kids in the school. Everything was built around the student. The student had each day his or her own playlist, and there were various stations in a large room. We named them for the Statue of Liberty, Empire State Building, whatever. And at different stations, they would be doing just what Jeb is talking about. It was a 6th grade math summer school program. And some of them would be being tutored one-on-one in areas where they didn't succeed. Some of them would be in small group. Some of them would be online doing games in a lecture course, tutoring online, every possible modality, and literally thousands and thousands of different content aggregations that we put together. And each day, we would crunch data just the way we would assess, and we would crunch. And then we had an algorithm. You know, ever since I sued Microsoft, I just wanted my own algorithm. I really do. So now I've got my algorithm. And it's a very sophisticated algorithm, and I hope it's protected as intellectual property because it's very good. And so we crunch how, in fact, Tom Vanderrock, where he was making strides, where he was gaining most, and then reshuffle his play card each day. And we get this information to our teachers, piloted over some of the original evaluation, independent evals have been terrific. We're now taking all of that, and in the spring, and I invite you all to come. Kathleen Shanahan, who's here with us, came to see this. I invite you all to come. In the spring, we're going to start it in 3 schools in 6th grade math, and then we have a massive ramp up. In addition to that, we've opened things called the iSchool, distance learning, different bodies of time. I've never understood why our kids can't hear the greatest lecturers in the world and get credit for it. One simple example, true in most states in America today. If you don't have enough kids to form an advanced placement class in physics, they can't take it without a teacher. If you offer to let them go online, take it, and if they pass it, they can get college credit, but they can't get high school credit in many school districts. And John Dacey's down here shaking his head. How ridiculous a system. So all the things that you're talking about, we opened up a school, Quest to Learn. The whole thing is based on games, but not fun and games in a classic way, sophisticated education. Kids who have to go from mission to mission built on subquests. It's an applied learning, inquiry-based thing. And what I hope to do over the next several years in New York is create this model of innovation in which entirely different approaches are tried. Do I know that all of them will work? Do I know that any of them will work? No. But I'll be damned if I sit back in a four-corner offense in public education, hold the ball, continue to do the things that we're doing, while kids in America continue to fall further and further behind. And that's what we are doing.
Let me ask the governor to respond really quickly. It strikes me that state policy matters. Joel's operating in a state where they don't even have an online learning law. Florida is now sitting on the pole position for race to the top, really because of the work that you and your team did in the last 10 years on virtual learning and on data. I mean, those are two really important areas. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the role. We have a lot of state policy makers here.
I think what we think about at our little foundation is how do you create the path of least resistance for the maximum policy impact? I mean, you know, trying to use the art of war approach, or you know, the Sun Tzu approach, rather than the way that, frankly, when I was governor, we did it, which was I was accused of, correctly so, of, you know, basically it was my way or the highway. That was some of my former colleagues in the legislature are still around. I mean, basically, we had to...
There's knowing laughter in the front row here.
That works, but it's not as... for the more transformational kind of reforms, I think you need to find ways that are... for example, I'll give you one simple example. Why do we fund... We fund college credits based on what courses kids take. No one thinks that's a radical idea, but why wouldn't we do it for a junior in high school? Why wouldn't we have a menu of courses that a junior in high school could take, and why wouldn't we fund, some of those may be online, some would be in the classroom, why wouldn't we fund, even in Florida, you know, our online courses for Florida Virtual School, they're funded if you pass them. They're not funded if you don't. I mean, the point being, if you went to a credit system, you'd have more offerings, a more diverse, probably much more interesting menu of courses. Kids wouldn't be as bored to tears. You would create new players on the field, but it wouldn't be considered a voucher, which the minute you use that word, it creates all of this, you know, fights. I'm prepared to fight. Don't get me wrong. I think it's important enough to go to war about this stuff, and I had great joy doing it. But if you could have a requirement that a third of all the classes a student could be allowed to take online, and you created a system where, you know, you get the courses from all over. Frankly, in my opinion, it'd be all over the world. If Australia's got the best physics teachers and you got a kid excited about physics and he can take it online, why would we impede them to do it? You're going to create that's disruptive. That'll create all sorts of systemic change, and that would be a simple thing. It may not be as controversial as creating a voucherized public education system. That's just one example. So there are a lot of those around, and they're being done. Sometimes, though, we don't push for the systemic. We focus on the margins, and we stay there. And I think now's the time to take these reforms and make them kind of cascade into the mainstream.
So I'm going to ask the Chancellor just to comment on policies that would promote equity and excellence. But before you answer that, we're going to open up to your questions, and I think Adam and Jeb Jr. have microphones in the back. We have a limited amount of time, so I'm going to ask for pithy questions, not speeches, so that we can focus on our panelists. But if you would raise your hand, and we'll get you a microphone. Before we launch into that, do you want to comment on the sort of policy barriers?
Well, so first of all, I do want to talk about policy, but I love being with the governor because I always learn so much about politics and the art of I've said this before. I've never been anyone whose mix of policy and politics is as great as Jeb's is. I mean, he gets the two together. So for me, it's always a learning experience.
But would have been roadkill in New York City, by the way.
I would agree with that. I agree with that. But, you know, you got to train someplace, and Florida's sunny. But, you know, when people always say to me, it's my way or the highway, right? What that's often shorthand for is it's my way or your way. And our kids need people who are willing to stand up and fight for their way. If everything is a half measure in life, then oftentimes the kids are the ones who suffer. Joel Klein, Jeb Bush, we're going to be fine. Question is, how about all those poor kids in northern Manhattan, central Brooklyn, and the South Bronx? Who the hell's going to fight for them? And the people in this room and the people outside this room have got to really become warriors in this fight for kids, because let's be truthful, all of our kids are going to get a good education. Education is not like terrorism, where terrorism doesn't know zip code. Education knows zip code. So the politics of this matter a lot. On the policy front, there's such obvious things, and if you bring them up, people get uncomfortable. But in New York and virtually every other city, you've got to pay math and science teachers the same as you pay all your other teachers, and you increase their pay based on seniority. As a result of that, as night follows day, I'm going to be short qualified math and science teachers. I'm not looking to pay people more. I'm a manager. I got a lot of needs and not a lot of resources. But I'm going to be short math and science teachers. And when I'm short math and science teachers, the kids in middle-class neighborhoods are not paying the price. They'll have math and science teachers. Kids in high-poverty neighborhoods will pay the price. And as Jeb said, without good math and science teachers, two things follow. Those kids are not going to get the education they need, especially in the 21st century. And second of all, they're not themselves going to want to go into math and science. And so you have a multiplier effect. That's one of multiple policies. If you can't use incentives, if there are no consequences for non-performance, if you're restricted to basically paying people by the length of time, and if the most exciting financial moment of a teacher's life is when she retires, the system is not sending the right message. No, it's not. I mean, that's the whole thing is backloaded. Michael Bennett, the senator, did a study on this in Denver and showed it cost him, for his average 25-year teacher, 3.4 times what it cost him for his average 5-year teacher, and they're all basically paid the same. Look around the world. No organization that succeeds has that kind of policy. And lastly, Tom, and then open up, and all these regulatory things. I mean, people talk about seat time, but why wouldn't we want to access? I had some kid show me the other day, he said, well, I'm bored in class, so he's not supposed to, but he's got a little, iPod, and he's watching lectures from MIT. And you think he's going to get in trouble for that, right? What's the message we're sending this kid?
Thank you. All right, I know Giselle has a question here.
It seems to me, that both on the foundation front and in the Fed's, stimulus package front, a great deal of money is being invested in teacher effectiveness. That seems to me, in the light of what you were saying, sort of counterproductive. I mean, are we trying to determine what an effective teacher is in the 20th century? And how are we going to apply that to the 21st century? So I would like to know what you think should be the focus of investment if we're really going to transform the system, and we stop talking about the adults in the system and talk about the kids.
I think teacher effectiveness should be defined as which group of teachers achieves the greatest amount of gains in the students they're teaching. I mean, I know it sounds like a radical idea, but student learning ought to be the organizing principle for everything. And if you believe, like I do, and I think most people would agree, that you learn differently, you learn at a different pace, it's a challenge, but it can be measured, and it ought to be measured, and it ought to be about student gains, and there ought to be rewards as part of this more front-loading of reimbursement for teachers rather than the backload benefit, which is so true. I hadn't heard it say that way. That's such a New Yorkie kind of way, but it's kind of cool about the retirement being the greatest day for a teacher. If you backload all the benefits like we do now, then that's the natural thing. But if you front-load it based on the actual learning, whether it's through technology or just in the traditional means, I think that's a good thing. And there are places where that's being done on the margins, and we need to figure out kind of breakthrough policy opportunities to make it happen. Some state's going to figure this out, and guess what's going to happen 3 or 4 years later? The best teachers are going to move to those states that reward maybe dramatically different than what we're talking about. Joel, you have a school in one of your charter schools where the average salary is like $120,000.
Starting salary for teachers is $125,000.
So why can't that be? Why is that such a? Everybody goes, wow. Well, that's so unusual. But in fact, you could organize a school to make that happen. And if it worked, it should be. We got to figure out how to create the policy so that these great innovations don't get stuck in that one school, but they move across the entire system. I don't know if Clay Christensen's here, but his book about disrupting class is just right on point on this point, which is great change will happen on the margins, in the increments, and then if it's disruptive, it will change the mainstream. I believe technology is the place where that will happen more, but it could happen in other ways.
So I agree with that. Just a quick coda, Giselle, because I think you're raising an important issue. If we don't get the human resource piece right, we don't professionalize that, then whatever we're trying to do, we're swimming against the stiff tide coming back at us. However, the point you're making, looking forward to a 21st century view of the way to deliver educational services is going to require big investments, and they're difficult. We invested $80 million on what is, I think, the best data system in the country. It's very sophisticated. It's becoming second best data system in the country. Right? Actually, we stole it from Florida, Judge, but it's okay. He stole my speech today when he gave it, so we're kind of even. But I get killed for that system. Even though it's empowering to teachers, parents now have data about their kids they've never had. But I get killed because people say, $80 million, you could have put it into the arts or lowered class size or done one of the billions of other things that are highly desirable. And if you think in education, every R&D dollar I spend, every innovation investment I make comes out of an area which I could easily spend more money on. I do need more arts programs, lower class size, and all the other things. So one of the things we've done in New York with some success and important to people like you is I think the philanthropic community has got to get behind this R&D long-term investment because that's where you can have a leveraged impact. We've raised some $350 million of private philanthropy over the course of the last 7 years. And going forward, to do this School of One, for example, it's going to take an enormous amount of investment. And we're going to need, particularly in tough economic times, we're going to need philanthropic support, business community support to enable us to create the leverage and indeed multi-state efforts, school districts coming together so that each one of us doesn't have to do it on our own.
All right. We have a question over here.
A quick question. Chancellor, you were in an interview in the Wall Street Journal where you talked about teacher quality, which obviously lots of people talk about, and you cited that the bottom 25% of kids are going to ed school and the bottom 25% of those kids are going to high poverty areas. I want to invert that question for the both of you. It seems to me like some of the best school leaders, superintendents, chancellors, whatever, are not from traditional education backgrounds, at least those are the high profile people. Could you talk briefly about how you think we ramp up getting more non-traditional folks into the school leadership business and how we should be, I mean, obviously student achievement's everything, but what should we be doing to measure and kind of refocus broadly who we want to run our school districts?
Well, I'll throw a grenade in the room. I think we should blow up the whole credentialing process. It doesn't. The data that I've seen, based on Florida now, it may be different in other places, doesn't suggest that a certified teacher from with a 4-year degree in education from one of our universities, or for that matter, a university outside of our state, yields a better result as it relates to student learning than an alternatively certified teacher that comes from life in all sorts of, in all its glory, into the classroom. There's not much data that suggests that you're going to get a better result. So why do we stick to it? Well, because we've been doing it. I think there are better ways to train teachers about classroom management, the things that are important, and give them more training there, and open up the universe of prospective teachers, particularly now with the economic conditions as it is. It makes all the sense in the world to look at this. So I would start with that. As it relates to principal development, once again, New York City has got maybe one of the better models of how to develop leadership for running schools and then empowering them and giving them the responsibility and not only responsibility, but they have consequences for their leadership. And I think maybe you could describe that and anything else that is on your brilliant mind.
Well, we did invest big time in school leadership, which really matters. I don't care how good your reforms are. Absent good leadership at the school level, it's not going to work. Teachers don't want to work in a place where they feel that they're dictated to, where they feel that they're not valued, where human resources aren't supported, and so forth. And we made heavy investment, actually raised about $75 million from the private and philanthropic communities for that. But I also think he's focusing on district leadership, in other words, who goes to be a superintendent, and how do you bring people from other fields into that area. And that's something that's happened in America. It's actually very unique. There's probably a dozen non-educators.
Like you.
Like myself, exactly. It's not, in New York, that's not a term of endearment. I hope it is for you.
It is.
But there's about a dozen now. You know, Arnie Duncan, there are people like, in some respects, Michelle, Alan Burson, Tom Boasberg, Michael Bennett. These are really, I think, high value-added people. So I think there are a couple of questions to this. Number one, by and large, most people who really want to change things are not going to get caught up in school board politics. So I'm a big believer in mayoral control. I don't think it's sufficient, the wrong mayor, just as he or she can screw up, everything else can screw up education. But I think in the absence of mayoral control, it's very hard to find a leverage. John Dacey, who's sitting in the front row, did it well in Prince George's, but it's very hard, and he may have a unique set of skills. But most of us are too impatient to get consumed in board politics. Second thing is I chair the Broad Foundation's Urban Superintendent's Academy, basically, the Broad Center. And we have been successful in recruiting, we probably have about 30, 35 people now who are superintendents throughout the United States. But we've been successful in recruiting from the military sector. We've been successful in recruiting from the public sector, but not successful from the business sector. And I'm not sure you're going to be able to recruit a lot of people into a job whose ceiling pay is $250,000 in most parts of the country, and who are constantly in the crosshairs. Whether you like it or not, in education, this is always going to be noisy. And some people would rather sort of not walk down the street on a Saturday afternoon like I have to, and listen to people with their wife or their daughter next to them saying what an idiot you are. It's just not a cheerful way to spend the weekends, but it goes with the territory.
I can echo that. I was the first, or one of the first business guys to become a superintendent. I had a teacher strike my first day on the job. My kids are saying, "Daddy, who are those people with signs in front of our house?" My wife is wondering about my life choices. So I would also mention the Broad Fellows program, which I think is a way to build the pipeline of grabbing young people in professional degree programs and getting them into a district cabinet where they won't be quite as green as I was when I became superintendent, where they can spend a few years at a cabinet level and then become a superintendent. But Broad has certainly made an important contribution in terms of non-traditional leadership. We have one over here. You have a question? No? Do you have another one over here?
There's one in the back, Tom. I think there's a...
Oh, yeah.
I'm a Hill staffer, and I had just two quick questions. One, the current iteration of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act is up for reauthorization, and sort of since 1965, we have multiple silos of funds. And how do we, one, get away from that, and two, kind of help change Congress to think more maybe in a block grant form, or sort of getting away from, if you receive these federal funds, you can only use these for very specific things and the reporting requirements. And two, my sort of non-related question is, many school districts are sort of bound by collective bargaining agreements. DC obviously is a very current and present example. So how do we get away from that to kind of move our current education system into the 21st century?
We could spend all afternoon on...
I would...
so
as it relates to the block grants, if you have an accountability system, then there shouldn't be strings attached to the money. The focus is on learning. If kids learn, you develop, I think the strategies ought to be developed at the state and local level in partnership. And the expectations can be, are interestingly becoming national now by consensus. What our expectations are, everybody now realizes they have to go up. We're moving towards these standards where there's broad acceptance of them, and they're going to be significantly higher, and we'll talk about that during the conference. That, to me, is that what should be what drives policy, is that we have an expectation that more kids learn at that level. How you do it ought to be done at least in the least prescriptive way possible. So I've always thought that block grants would be a better way to go. We took advantage of the discretionary money we had when I was governor from the Department of Education. It wasn't a big slug of money, but it was hugely important to advance reform. And if we had more, we could have advanced reform faster. As it relates to collective bargaining, I'll let my brother Joel talk about it, since he lost his hair talking about it.
I was actually thinking it's funny. You said you knew Willard before he didn't have it. You didn't know me before I didn't have any hair. I lost my hair when I sued Microsoft. So I think this whole categorical approach and everything, I think this is a politically driven approach that makes no sense. I think the money ought to go based on accountability, but it has to be held against accountability. If you think about it, in education, unlike in most areas, again, where do we invest? We invest in the things that don't work. You get turnaround grants, you get all sorts of money that comes in if you don't succeed. And then, in fact, if you start to turn the thing around, they yank the money from you. So we need a system from the federal government through the state government that doesn't try to micromanage the way we spend, but that is really vigilant about holding us accountable for the results we get. The federal government shouldn't invest in things, we're not that rich, that don't produce real results, real achievement. And I must say, I think what the President and Secretary are doing are really driving at this. And the funny thing, and Jeb said it before in a different way, the funny thing is, I think, when it comes to education, for quite a while now, there's been fundamental agreement toward the middle. While I'd be the first to say that NCLB needs some changes, you know, if you think about it, I mean, it was Teddy Kennedy, Jeb's brother, George Miller, they were the architects of this. Bill Clinton was strong for charter schools long before it was fashionable for Democrats to be strong for charter schools. And now if you look at a lot of the things that the President and the Secretary are talking about, they are similar. Look, we can all learn from the mistakes. There have been plenty of mistakes made. But I think what's going on with the race to the top is exciting in the following way, and I just leave you with this thought. If indeed the money truly goes for those who run the fastest, bring in the reforms that align with the 4 key planks that the President spoke about in his speech earlier this year, and if we really don't live with the political system that says every state's got to get a small piece of this, and we actually reward those programs in those states that are doing really exciting things, I think we will then create a template for the next reauthorization of ESEA, where we actually start to think that the way the federal government gives its money is to bet on success, to bet on transformation, to bet on innovation, and not to bet on making sure every district gets its equal allotment of earmarks.
Chancellor and Governor, thank you. 2 of America's education heroes. Thanks.